was this man called.
It helps you remember.
And some of these things are rather odd, the way we look at things nowadays. David married one of Saul's daughters. Now, Saul gave him that daughter for a job he did. What was her name? Anybody in here remember that? That's right. Michal, I believe it is. Michelle or Michael. David was a warrior. He killed the enemy in batches. And later on, when David wanted to build the temple, God didn't allow him to build the temple because he had blood on his hands. Instead, he let this man, his son, build the temple. So you see the background of David, a warrior, a fighter, destroyer of the enemy of the children of God. He went out and killed a bunch of the enemy and brought back, you remember how many foreskins? Crew, didn't it? But that's what he did. 100, I believe it was. And for that, he bought the king's daughter, in essence. That's some price to pay. But these odd things like that, it just sort of piques your interest in the Bible and showing that the Bible shows all these things. And he married this woman, but he also had other wives. So that sets up the condition that you'll find him later on when he commits adultery to get another woman. So this man, even though the Bible says that he was a man after God's own heart because his heart was right, he sure had some faults. But that's some of the things that happened. He was a friend to Jonathan. He had Jonathan's sister as one of his wives. And later, when he had to flee from the king because he didn't want to hurt the king, King Saul was jealous of him because the people were showing allegiance to David because David was such a great warrior, and King Saul was losing his popularity. So King Saul had intended to have David killed. And David ran, he left the household, left his wife, that daughter, and she was given to another man. You see that marriage wasn't too strictly taken in those days to get rid of wives and get others when they wanted to, it looked like. But nevertheless, that happened. Later on, when David came back into power, he got that woman back. And there was friction there. Another one of these cases where you've got a bunch of wives, it's not a happy hunting ground, evidently. She's the one that, I believe I'm right, that talked about him dancing and having all the mechanical instruments of music playing when they brought the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem. So David could well have been a show-off in a lot of ways, but he wrote Psalms. Psalms is, I guess it is the longest book in the Bible. And if you read those Psalms, you have to think, well, this was a man who really respected God. And God had stated that he was a man after his own heart. So if you sometimes look at this man and then look at Peter in the New Testament, looks like Peter would stub his toe over his toenail to say the wrong thing or maybe to jump to conclusions at times. Well, and Peter was a good man. He turned out right. He denied Christ. He cursed and denied Christ and things like that. But still he turned out right. David did all these things, yet he turned out right. So it means his heart was right, and he repented of these things. David wrote almost all of the Psalms. everybody probably remembers the 23rd Psalm better than they do any other chapter in the Bible. But then there is that first chapter in Psalms, which is very memorable. And then there's the place in Psalms where it says, who is man that thou visiteth him? And so on. You made him a little lower than the angels. But look at this number 1 Psalm. Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the wicked, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the law of Jehovah. I saw this Hagee, or what that name on, I don't know what sort of religion he is. I think he's his own religion, but he's comical to watch sometime on television. He's from San Antonio, Texas. And he was talking about the value of studying the Bible one time. He says, my mother used to beat it into me. He says, she would say, blessed when she was whipping me. She said, blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly. Whap! And said, but standeth in the way of the righteous. And she'd whop me again. And then he said, nor sitteth in the seat of scoffers, and she'd hit me again. And he said, by the time she got through whipping me, I was learning that. It's kind of comical, but this is a chapter that many people teach their children. But his delight is in the law of Jehovah, and on his law doth he meditate day and night. Now that's the Bible. There is a reason to study the Bible. This goes back to another time, not during our dispensation, but his delight is in the law of the Lord. All right. And he shall be like a tree planted by the streams of water, that bringeth forth its fruit in its season, whose leaf also doth not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. The wicked are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind driveth away. Therefore the wicked shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For Jehovah knoweth the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked shall perish. A very valuable piece of scripture to teach children, to teach adults, to teach those who respect God. All right. That's some of the nature by the writings of this man David. For instance, the 23rd Psalms, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still water. He restoreth my soul, and so on. The American Standard Version might read slightly different. Jehovah is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul. Talked with a fellow here that died in the 1970s, and he was going into an operation that he feared, a heart operation, and I went to visit him just before he went in that, and he liked to have the Bible read to him. I had a copy of the New Testament with Psalms in it. I read that to him. Later on, when he came out, he said, I went completely under the knife just thinking of, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. This is a comforting chapter here, the 23rd Psalms. You might find it very valuable in times of distress in your life. All right, back to our line of history coming down through the Bible. Saul ruled 40 years. He became arrogant. He disobeyed God. God had told him through his spokesman that he would not continue as ruler. He finally, how'd he kill him? How'd it happen? He killed himself. Fell on his sword. And he had tried to kill David. David fled. If you read the stories there, you'll find that David could have killed him at times. When he was sleeping at night, David at one time just crept up on him and was right there with him. The man that was trying to kill him, David could have killed Saul, but he didn't. He said he respected the king. It's kind of like what we got in Washington now. I do not respect this man that we got in there as a man, but he is our president. Therefore, David said, "You are our king. I'll respect the king." He could have killed him, but he didn't. Then when Saul died, David took over. David was the next king. Now, I've already told you some of the things in David's life, and the principal thing was that God said he is a man after my own heart. He's a man after God's own heart. When he picked him, the 8th son of Jesse, not the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, not the eldest or anything like that, but he went all the way down to the 8th son. Evidently small in stature, because when he went out to kill Goliath, Saul, the big man, said, "Take my armor." And it didn't fit him. That would just burden him down with all that clatter and stuff hanging on him. So he cast that all aside and took his little old shepherd's sling, which would have been a little piece of leather with a pouch on the end of it, that they became very, very skillful in hitting things. With a little pouch like that, you could wind it up and almost hit as surely as a gun can in certain instances. He went across a brook and he picked up some little pebbles or little rocks, just like he wanted. And when he approached the giant, of course, laughed at him and would have killed him. But David, with his sling, hit him right in the temple, killed him, then cut his head off. All right, now there he was, a little man, defeating God's people's enemy. And he's different in stature from this man. That's the whole thing. But he was a great warrior. And he had one of Jonathan's daughters for a wife. He had one of his sons for a very close friend. He had been in Saul's household. So that's the background for this man David. He played the harp. He played the harp to soothe the ears of King Saul, for instance. Later on, he played the harp and was, as you might say, condemned by his wife because of doing such when it involved the Ark of the Covenant, which is kind of a roundabout way of saying that must not have been the way they intended it to be done, even in those days. So, David ruled 40 years, but he had problems, many, many problems. He saw a woman. He went out on his balcony. We could picture it as maybe the finest place in Jerusalem because it belonged to the king. And throughout that area, and even nowadays, they still value their rooftops as a place of sitting out on rooftops and so on and doing certain work. And you might have noticed when Rahab, the harlot, hid the spies, it was out on the rooftop. They use that as another part of their domicile, so to speak, and put maybe grain and things up there. But this particular woman was bathing on her rooftop. And I don't know whether she was modest enough or not. It would seem that she wasn't, but David saw her. And he saw her beauty. And he lusted after her and had her sent to him. The king got all kind of powers. Hey, I want that beautiful woman I saw. Well, she came to him, and he lay with her, meaning he had sexual intercourse with her, and she got pregnant. Well, her husband was in the army or the service of King David, and he wanted to cover this horrible thing up, but you know what's going to happen to a pregnant woman. She's going to change in her looks. Stomach will stick out. All right. In trying to cover it up, the soldiers were brought back into Jerusalem, and they had time off just like they do nowadays. Every now and then Bob gets a little bit of time off. But when he came back, David had intended to let him go down to his household, and of course you see the plot there. Then He went back to his house and slept with his wife, or had relations with his wife. Therefore, later on, they could say, well, that's his son or his child. But the man was so loyal, he said, I won't go back to my house when all these other soldiers don't get a chance to go back to their house. So that didn't work. And all sorts of shenanigans are played out there. You should read it. Finally, David figures the only way that he can get rid of that man is to have him killed. Now, you see, what one sin to cover up another, it gets worse and worse. So he wrote orders and sent back to the front to the commanding officer to put this man that's bearing this message in the forefront of the battle and then withdraw from it. In other words, they're throwing spears and things like that and punching people with knives and swords. And you put him right up there in the midst of everything, everybody else draw back. Sure death. That's what happened. Had that man killed, his name was what? Uriah. What was the woman's name that he committed adultery with? Bathsheba. Just remember, she's taking a bath on the roof, and her name was Bathsheba. Evidently a beautiful woman. All right. So there's the man killed, and David had it covered up, so to speak. But later on, the prophet or the spokesman for God came to him, and what was his name? Anybody remember? Nathan? Somebody look that up. Prophet for God, or the spokesman for God, came to David, and he gave him a little story. He said that a man had just one sheep, yet there was another man living next to him that had a whole herd, just had plenty. One was rich and the other was poor. Yet when the man that had plenty decided he wanted to throw a big party and a big eat out, let's say, he sent and got the sheep of that poor man. And you see that? Well, that's a riddle, isn't it? Well, he told him, that's what you did, David. You already had some wives, all kind of power, and you sent and got this other man's woman, and then had him killed, of all things. Well, it broke David's heart, and we say, well, he's caught. Well, he was caught. Then how did he ever figure out right in the end? No, you have to realize that he was repentant. You can read, I believe, the 50th Psalms to see how repentant he is of the things he did wrong. What was that man's name? Did you find it? Nathan. Nathan came to David and told him these things. So David was a sinner on a grand scale, and he knew it. But as we realize and have stated, he was a repentant man, and he therefore had problems, though, because of what he had done. This son would not live that was born of that relationship. He had had relations with another man's wife. She conceived, and you don't see a whole lot of it, but some might say, well, he did the honorable thing. He took her and kept her from there on out and made a wife out of her. Well, that's true, and evidently she was smarter than the rest of them, because she got her son to be the next king. She helped out in that, because all of them wanted to be king, following David, all the sons. Hey, I'd like to step in there. But the one that won out was a son by Bathsheba. All right. This son was born of adultery. People would nowadays call it a bastard. Or, by the way, bastard is a good term, a good biblical term, but we don't use it so much because people have made slang out of it to say it to other people in a bad way when it doesn't apply. But when applied correctly, it's a good word. A bastard is an illegitimate person. So this son was born, and got real sick. David wept. David rent his clothes. This was a custom of the Jews to show that they were in deep grief. Put ashes on his head and forehead and so on to show that he was in deep grief because this son was about to die. And he was in such grief that his servants were afraid to approach him and tell him, your son's dead. But when they did, he got up and he washed himself and he put on clean clothing and raiment, as it's called. That's a word for clothing in the Bible, raiment. And he said something then that is quoted at many, many funerals and quoted under many conditions. Can somebody tell me what he said? David? Or in general, you don't have to be exact about it. He can't come where I am, but I can go where he is. He has gone to be with the Lord forever, that little child has. And I have no hopes of getting him back, but I can go where he is if I live the correct life. That's good advice for us today. Children do not sin without learning it. So this child would have been safe. People sometimes nowadays say, well, a child's born in sin. He ought to be baptized. He ought to have water sprinkled on his head. He ought to be blessed by this or blessed by that. That's not the Bible teaching. The Bible teaches that they do not have the sin of their parents. They are safe until they get to the point where they can make decisions and become sinners. So the child died. The household suffered after David had done these things. He had sons by these women, and one of the sons rebelled against him and would have killed David, or would have had him killed. That's just how much meanness there was in that household. His name was what? He used to stand in the gate and say, people that would come to the king to solve their problems, he stood out at the gateway, let's say, to where the palace was, and said, I'll take care of your problems here. I'll undermine my daddy. I'm the king's son. Look at here. I can do these things. What was his name? Absalom. Absalom. He's the one who had the long hair. And he thought he was beautiful, I guess. He may have been. I don't know. But the Bible says that when David learned that he was dead, he said, oh, Absalom, my Absalom. It broke his heart that the man, his son, was dead, but the son would have killed his daddy. That's just a situation. There was another instance in that household. You know that with several wives, you've got half-brothers and half-sisters. So but they're all the sons and daughters of David. One of the daughters was raped by her half-brother. Well, that caused anguish among others in the household. So then a son or a brother killed that other half-brother. So can you imagine having a family where they're killing each other, and one of them would have killed you? And there was some terrible things happened in David's household. But through all of that, David is the writer of Psalms. David was a man of God. David had problems. He wanted to build the temple, but God wouldn't let him because he had blood on his hands. Well, you say King Solomon, he was a king over a great nation. Why didn't he have blood on his hands? Not like David. David fought personally. And David evidently was like our President Andrew Jackson in this country. I think the only president that ever killed people with his own hands. But this man Solomon would have been a king who ruled in splendor and power and sat back and let other people do his work. Well, that's what kings and presidents do. Somebody's got to be at the top. But David wasn't able to build the temple. Now, why say something about the temple? You see, after all of these wanderings, 40 years and 50 years here, and all this time here, they're trying to hold on particularly to the Ark of the Covenant. And they had the plans for the tabernacle. The tabernacle was a temporary place of worship for the Jews. It was made of cloth. It was made of skins and so on. It was a tent structure that they could move from one place to the other in the wanderings and 40 years wanderings and set it up. Well, that being temporary, then they looked forward to the time when they could build a solid stone permanent temple of God. And that's what David wanted to do. Now, and God wouldn't let him, so he did something, though, in preparation for it. What was that? If you go north of this promised land nowadays, you go into an area called Lebanon. That's where a bunch of our soldiers were killed back in the 80s. Where that bunch of folks over there bombed that big hotel with a car bomb and killed 300 and some odd, I believe it was, because it's such an unruly country. But the cedars of Lebanon were renowned. And cedar is one of the best building materials on earth and one of the most expensive, so you don't see much of it around these parts. Bugs won't even eat it. And it smells good. People like it. It's pretty. Lebanon was known for its growth of cedars. There's a town outside of Nashville called Lebanon, and you can imagine why. There's lots of cedars around in that area. The cedars of Lebanon. He gathered a lot of this material and had it brought down to this area while he was king, because they would need wood in this structure that they were going to build, the temple. So he couldn't build it. He had lots of problems, and he did some terrible things. By the way, we were talking about this daughter that was bought with in effect bought with 100 foreskins. Why would that be significant to bring back that type of a thing? You know, during World War II, a lot of soldiers were told not to bring back ears, Japanese ears, and things like that. Ear was the most prominent thing to bring back as a souvenir. They cut the ears off of those bodies over in the Pacific. But if you got caught, they would be taken away from you. Ear would cure pretty easily. There's not much flesh there. But the Jews were all supposed to be circumcised. That made a Jew a Jew. On the 8th day, all Jew baby boys were to be circumcised. So if you went out and you killed a bunch of enemies, what's proof that you killed them? That they had a foreskin, if you please. So he brings back 100. That means I've killed 100 men, because they're not apt to let you cut that off by cooperating. So that's what happened there. That's some of the things that David was involved in. Now, we come to the time when David was about to die. He was 70 years old, and he was sick of bed, and he had wives. And what did they do then? You see the mentality of those folks, and maybe David too. Maybe if you get me a young woman, I'll feel better, or I'll get well. So they got him another wife, a young woman. Well, yeah, probably already had these old ones. And that didn't work, though. He died anyway. And then there was some problems after his death about who got that young woman. So if you just look at some of those things, it's rather odd situations that went on in the Old Testament. David, after he died, then Bathsheba had already been advising him a whole lot. It seems to me like that this woman Bathsheba may have had the inside track with David, something like Rachel had with Jacob. And you can imagine such, because her son Solomon was the one that got the throne. Well, now Solomon was a good man. So as a young king, he prayed to God, and when he prayed to God as a ruler, he did not ask for wealth, he did not ask for power, but he asked for wisdom to rule God's people. And God told him that because you've not asked for wealth and power, I will give you wisdom, wealth, and power. Therefore, this man, Solomon, is known as the wisest man on earth, other than deity. Of course, Christ was deity. Christ was God on earth. We don't throw in those who are part of deity. This man is known as the wisest man on earth. During his reign, the kingdom of Israel expanded to its greatest lengths. I guess this right here, this map would show it best. The area that they commanded spread back out over into here and up in here and so on. By the way, this is Lebanon right in here. So it went way over in here. There again, that's some of the reason why some of these folks over here, the Iraqis and the Persians, and were in that time, Medo-Persians and so on, hated the Jews so bad. They at one time had a lot of this territory in here. It was under Solomon's rule that the kingdom reached its zenith, its peak. No other time in history has the land and the leadership of the Jews been as great as it was under Solomon. Now down here in Africa, here is Egypt. Below that's the Sudan, and below the Sudan is Ethiopia. There's a lot of black Jews down in there. This Jewish religion spread down into Ethiopia. Some still think nowadays that the Ark of the Covenant may be hidden down in there somewhere. It's rather fascinating. I doubt it myself. But down here from Ethiopia, a woman queen heard about this man Solomon, and she said, I'll go up there and see. What's all this I heard? And after she had seen all that Solomon had, the